Call to order the December 9, 2024 meeting of the Policy Review Committee of the Board of Education of Baltimore County. In accordance with Board Policy 8311, the chair of a committee at their discretion and after consultation with the staff liaison may convene an in-person committee meeting. Otherwise, all committee meetings will be held electronically. Today's Policy Review Committee meeting is being held virtually and broadcasted through Microsoft Teams Live on the BCPS website. To conduct this meeting by virtual means, all voting items this afternoon will be done by a roll call vote. Board members will say their names before making and seconding a motion as applicable, as well as when requesting discussion on an agenda item. Additionally, as a courtesy to the committee, I ask that you inform Ms. Wash, Ms. Pitts, or Ms. Howie if you must leave the call by using the Teams chat feature so that a quorum can be maintained. Ms. Pitts, please call the roll to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Thank you. Ms. Frimpong? Ms. Harvey?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Henn?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Delusky?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Pumphrey?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Chike Kalu?
Present.
Thank you. You have a quorum with 4 members present.
Thank you, Ms. Pitts. Please call the roll to determine which staff members are present in this meeting.
Sure. Dr. DiNonato?
Present.
Dr. Grimm?
Present.
Mr. Hartlove?
Present.
Dr. Jones? Mr. Connolly?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Reed?
Present.
Thank you. Dr. Koff?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Lazary?
Present.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Present.
All right. Mr. Howie?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Howie?
Here.
And Ms. Wash?
Here.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'll pass the meeting back over to you.
Thank you. First on our agenda is item B1, Policy 3160, review and approval of school-sponsored activities. Policy 3160 is on the 2024-2025 review schedule. Mr. Hartlove, if you and the appropriate staff could please proceed.
Sure, and we have here to give a high-level overview of the changes, Mr. Michael Howie and Mr. Craig Reed. So I'd start with Mr. Howie. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartlove. I'm Michael Howie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Howie. I am a risk and insurance specialist in the Office of Budget and Reporting in the Division of Fiscal Services. And today I'll speak about this policy from a risk management perspective, and Mr. Reed will speak to the policy from a school-based perspective. From a risk management perspective, this policy recognizes the importance of minimizing the risk of personal injury to students and to staff, minimizing the risk of property loss, and minimizing the risk of property damage, while balancing the board's commitment to supporting school-sponsored activities that enhance a student's education. And this balancing act is done by providing principals and school-based staff a list of prohibited high-risk activities. Those activities that are prohibited are activities that expose students and staff to an elevated level of risk of property loss, personal injury, property damage, and this balance, and as a result, the policy applies across all grade levels, and its application does not create any barrier to equitable outcomes. We've noted similar policies that other local school LEAs and local school agencies have supported, and all of them seem to be consistent in that they stress that the activities must be related to curricular purposes. Are there questions that I can address from a risk management perspective?
I have one question that I think is directed to risk management. With this change, actually, it might not be. I'm going to ask anyway. With this change, are we aware of any specific activities that will be on the list that's prohibited at this point that may not have been on the past in the past?
That's a very good question. And we have added activities, and we meet annually. We committee composed of representatives throughout the organization meet during the break between the school years to review activities that have risen to our attention that weren't previously an issue. So, for instance, a short while ago, an axe throwing business opened on Haven Street near Baltimore in southeast Baltimore. So, up until that point, we had not had axe throwing as an activity that was prohibited, uh, that was listed as a prohibited activity. But after the activity coming to our area, we added axe throwing as a prohibited activity.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members?
Mr. Reed, would you like to speak to the policy from a school perspective?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Mr. Howey laid out, we wanted to be sure that this policy contains updated information regarding risk, but we also want to balance that against the wide variety of activities that occur at schools. I think Mr. Howey's axe throwing example was a very good one. Schools are always looking for creative and exciting and interesting and engaging ways to participate in fundraising and to garner student and community interest. And so we wanted to be sure that this policy struck a balance of allowing schools to do the things that we know they can do, forbidding them from doing things that we know they cannot do, and for having a request and review process when there's something that may be in the middle. And so some of the changes that we made here are really just opportunities to clarify who they should be making those requests to, who they should be in consultation with, if they have one of those questions, making sure that the procedures generally at the principal level are clear and well understood. And as Mr. Howey said, we did review the procedures and policies and rules from some other local districts, as well as both of our professional experiences here within BCPS to make the adjustments that we hoped were appropriate. Certainly happy to speak to any changes.
Thank you. So sort of a related question. I'm noticing under number 3A, the major change here is that there's going to be a list provided to schools. Is that correct? So there'll be a list of high-risk activities that principal will immediately know that they can't even think about participating in. And then if something comes up that's not on that list, there's a process for review. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yes, that's accurate. And that list that Mr. Howey and his team create has actually existed for as long as I have been a school administrator, and it gets updated over time, as Mr. Howey said. So that's not a change. That's just a continuation of a good practice there.
Okay,
yes.
thank you. I think that was my main question because I see that the language has changed, but the actual list has existed. It's just the language has been updated to indicate specifically that there is a list.
You
I'm looking under 3A. I used to say, it looks like it previously said conducting an insurance and risk analysis of the proposed school-sponsored activities, and it's now going to say providing schools a list of high-risk activities.
I see. I was looking at the rule. That's the policies. Yes, the list has always existed. Yes, I think it was just a change in phrasing.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from committee members?
I have one, Ms. Pumphrey.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Henn.
Thank you. This is Ms. Henn. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
I noticed in the definition of school-sponsored activity, there's no qualification in terms of student involvement versus a participant versus a spectator. We really don't qualify in that definition how a student or really any participant or person attending that activity might be involved or their level of involvement. And it seems like that is purposeful, right? There's all types of levels of involvement. But a particular fundraiser comes to mind where, and Mr. Reed may recall a fundraiser at Perry Hall High School was proposed where a wrestling event came up, and there was risk involved in that event that involved the community as spectators, and it was deemed to carry some risk inherent to that. I believe ultimately it was approved, but initially it was questionable, right, in terms of the risk that that type of event carried. And according to this policy, then, would that be something that would be reviewed on a one-off basis? Was there any consideration, I guess my question is, consideration to defining or more granularly defining how the school community is involved versus the general public versus qualifying that somehow in order to approve certain levels of involvement, whether it's strictly spectators, whether the risk is less if it's spectator versus some type of participation. And maybe Mr. Howard, could you speak to that? Whether with that example or just in general? I don't want to put you on the spot and having to speak to a specific example per se.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, Ms. Hen.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
I do remember that activity. So that activity would have been addressed under policy 1300, which is the review and which is use of facilities. So it would have been addressed under 1300. Our policy is limited in that it just focuses on school-sponsored activities. So any activity that is beyond the scope of a school-sponsored activity would not be addressed in this policy.
I see. Thank you for that clarification. So this would not encompass that activity.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And
Sure.
then this would only involve those activities where students would be participating or perhaps spectators in that
Yes, ma'am.
activity would be the distinction
Yes, that's accurate.
versus a community activity. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification.
Sure. My pleasure.
Thank you, Ms. Hen. And any other additional questions from committee members? Okay, if there are no corrections and no objection, policy 3160 is moved forward for first reader as presented.
Ms. Pumphrey, may staff who presented on 3160 be excused?
Yes, and thank you very much.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item B2, policy 6500, research, testing, and evaluation expenditures. Policy 6500 is also on the 2024-2025 review schedule. Dr. Grimm, if you and appropriate staff could please proceed.
Good afternoon. Mr. Connolly will be presenting this information with Dr. Koch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grimm. Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Connolly. I'm the Executive Director of Research, Accountability, and Assessment. For you today, we have brought forward a policy review for 6500 that's for research, testing, and evaluation. There are minor updates and revisions to this policy, including in our policy statement, making a connection to having a specific testing process for selected system-wide assessments, and that the board recognizes that the school system may receive requests to conduct research from individuals and or agencies, and it's the responsibility of the school system to review all requests to ensure that the research conducted is aligned with school system goals, conducted to safeguard the privacy of all individuals involved, and does not unduly burden staff, students, and care providers. In addition to that language change, that updated language in our policy statement, we have also had updated information and language for the standards in relationship to research and how research is conducted and approved in BCPS, as well as the legal references to update the research expectations. The first reading is due for the board on February 25th at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Conley.
Thank you.
Any questions from committee members?
But this is Miss Harvey. I have a question.
Okay, Ms. Harvey, and then Ms. Selasky, I see your hand raised. You can go after Ms. Harvey, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to clarify. I saw the language about not causing any undue hardship on various groups. But when we're talking about this, whatever research proposals are, this would be proposals in the aggregate, correct? And there wouldn't be an instance where, or if there's an instance where they're looking at specific, I don't know, grades or classes or students, is there a standard by which parents would be notified?
Those are great questions, Ms. Harvey. Thank you very much. So we have a group, the Internal Review Board, and I'm going to ask Dr. Chrissy Koth to speak to that process specific to your questions regarding safeguarding student information, as well as research that's done in the aggregate or requests for more specified research.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Dr. Chrissy Koth, and I'm the Director of Research. And so we, as Mr. Connolly stated, we do have a committee that reviews all research currently that is proposed to the system. Oftentimes, it is for specific students. And before any research can be conducted, there needs to be informed parental consent and child assent before they can participate in any kind of research.
And Dr. Koth, could you please speak to the protection for pupil rights amendment, please?
So there are several additional laws that we have submitted. The specific Protection of Pupil Rights Act, I don't have that specifically on me and can't comment to that directly, but there are federal laws that protect any participant in research, and that it must not be overly burdened, and there must be informed written consent, and also child assent.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the public was really clear that any research that would take place, that parents would have a say in whether their children participate. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harvey. Ms. Selasky, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. In this section, and I'm sorry, I don't have the line number with regards to the impact on instruction, the burden on school staff, and benefits for students. I'm just thinking in an age where parents especially are increasingly concerned about the amount of test time in terms of it taking away from instruction. Should this section have some quantification or more specific details on how that analysis occurs and specific points that need to be considered? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. Part of that, difference between policy and rule is the level of detail that's included in each of those phases. We certainly this is, I believe you're referencing section C numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are on our lines 1 through 11. And it speaks specifically to all research must be approved prior to implementation. The screening process will consider, and that screening process really is what you're talking about, the details.
Yeah.
The impact on instructional time, the burden on staff, students, and parents, caregivers, staff availability and resources, and the benefit to individuals and the system. And then research will comply with all applicable federal and state mandates, board policies, superintendent's rules, and school system procedures. Is that the section you were referencing?
Yes, and I totally understand, being careful with policy and rule, and I'm not trying to contradict anything. But I know that, this is an area where the public is increasingly concerned. So just didn't know if there was anything in policy, perhaps maybe that the public is informed of whatever analysis is done as a result of this policy regarding impact, burden, and benefits. Perhaps there's just some kind of statement about informing the public about the specifics, or
So can I jump in? I'm sorry, this is
Sure.
Dr. Smith. So I do have to stress that all research conducted is completely voluntary, and it wouldn't be conducted at a school level. We are very concerned about instruction time, and we try not to have the research impact any instruction time at all. So the
Okay.
majority of the research is either done before school or after school.
okay. So that's
Um,
very helpful to know.
And
Thank
each
you.
specific research project gets specific written and signed informed consent from parents and assent from students.
Okay.
And to add
That's
to that,
really
Dr.
helpful.
Koth, that process provides the flexibility to have an adaptive structure for the different requests that we may receive.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lusky. Any other questions or discussion from committee members?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have a follow-up question,
Yes,
if
Ms.
I
Sen.
may.
Yes, Ms.
Thank
Sen, please
you.
proceed.
So I have the same two concerns I believe Ms. Delusky was expressing, and my follow-up is then, if those are important, then why aren't they in the policy? And those concerns are the requirement for written consent of parents and the privacy assurance. Those two items, and I know the privacy assurance has changed. It's still there. It seems weaker when I read the language, so that's a concern. But the requirement for written consent, and I believe I heard staff say that is required of parents, and also there's a student consent as well. I'm a little unclear as to what that piece is, but those two components are critical to be in this policy. Verbal, statements are one thing, but if the board is in agreement that these are important and that is our intent, then we need to express our intent in writing, and it needs to be in the policy. No matter what, the rule might say, no matter what other regulations may say, and even if it is in FERPA and law, that doesn't preclude us from indicating that that is our intent in the policy, even if it is redundant. So my follow-up is, if that's the case, then why isn't it in policy, I guess, is what I'm wondering, if that is what is happening.
So thank you for the question. I think we need to unpack that a little bit. One, because of the idea of redundancy that was brought into that conversation, but also the intention of explicitness. So Dr. Koth, can you speak a little bit more about the screening process and how that meets the requirements for written consent and the privacy assurance, and any additional information that would be beneficial for a policy to ensure the confidence in the research process we're following?
Sure. So the committee meets once a month to review submitted proposals. In the proposal, we request them to submit their parental consent and child assent, which describes specifically what it means to be in the research project, whether that be which activities, disclosure of any data, how long it will take. And so then the researcher, if the research project is approved, it will then, we request that the researcher, they reach out to parents directly, because this is an independent activity, not necessarily related to BCPS. So this is an independent activity, and they reach out to the parents to let them know about the research study, and then they can either participate or not.
So from a clarification standpoint for the policy, are there recommendations for specific language that would be included that would provide the appropriate guidelines for expectations without having it be so specific that it would actually be detrimental to the research review?
So, excuse me, Mr. Connolly, is your question for Ms. Hen?
No, for Dr. Koth.
Oh,
As
I'm
our
sorry.
research expert. Thank you.
We can put in language that all research is voluntary, and that requires informed written parental consent and child consent. These are all outlined, are outlined in the laws that we submitted. There are a number of laws on the books that are very specific about research and what you can and cannot do, but we can certainly add that research is voluntary, and that there will be written parental consent and child assent.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Howie, a clarifying question. Based on this discussion, if we were to move forward with those changes from staff, do we need a motion for that? Or since staff is aware and making the changes, can we proceed?
I would think, Madam Chair, that the committee would want to see the changes, and I would not feel comfortable recommending that the committee go forward without the specific changes and language from staff. So I would request your permission to return this to PRC with the language that staff recommends.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Howie. And Ms.
Thank
Hen,
you.
based upon discussion, does that answer your questions and your concerns?
It does, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any other concerns from other committee members? Okay, so based upon this discussion, we will return policy 6500 for staff to add additional language per our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
And
Next-
Madam Chair, if
Yes.
those staff members could be excused, please. I believe Dr. Grimm is on later, but
Okay.
Dr. Koth and Mr. Connolly, if they could be excused, please.
Yes, they may. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item B3, policy 6800, field trips and foreign travel study program. Dr. Donato, if you and appropriate staff could please proceed.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. In accordance with board policy, policy 6800 is scheduled for review during the 24-25 school year. This policy really confirms the board's support of field trips as a part of the curriculum that supports students' instructional program. After reviewing other LEA's policies and rules regarding foreign travel, the reference to foreign study programs has been recommended for deletion from this policy. We found that other local boards of education no longer permitted foreign travel. Consequently, we're recommending that this policy be revised to remove the reference to foreign study programs, and further delineate clear procedures for approving, conducting, and canceling field trips. There's some additional guidance that was also added with regards to chaperone to student ratios. And that is it.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion from committee members? Ms. Zaleski.
Thank you. Good afternoon. The only thought that I had in terms of the foreign travel, I know that the policies are not reviewed for 7 years, and I know that there are people in the past that have had wonderful school-based overseas travel, very meaningful, really high-quality learning experiences. Combined, I do know there are private schools that still conduct foreign travel experiences. So I just don't know, with removing all of the foreign travel notations, are we limiting ourselves since the policy would not be reviewed again for 7 years? Thank you.
I guess if there was a concern that there was a limiting factor, there could be, and again, Ms. Howie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but a policy could be reviewed sooner than 7 years. However, this modification puts us in alignment with other public schools. And I do understand that there's different procedures at private schools. This also does not preclude a student or a family from engaging independently in a foreign travel or foreign exchange type of program. It's just not the school system facilitating that study abroad program.
Have we recently had any foreign travel study programs in the past several years at any of our schools?
No. I believe it was 9 or 10 years ago that we had the last travel abroad.
Okay.
Ms. Pumphrey?
Yes, Ms. Zaleski.
So my daughter did not participate in this trip, but at her high school, and this was after schools reopened during the pandemic. I could find the exact year, but definitely within the past 3 years, her school conducted a trip. It did not occur during the school year. It was in June, right after the year completed, but it was sponsored, whether it was by the school, but I know the teacher was the person who organized it, and they went to study Incan culture, Machu Picchu, and it was a trip to Peru for like a history purpose. And her friends that joined on the trip had an amazing experience. And again, I'd have to look up the exact June date. But it was after schools reopened.
Ms. Zaleski, there was a vendor that was used that is actually not used, but there was a vendor organization that was doing some foreign travel trips. It was not through the approved field trip process. It was outside of that. But that vendor had worked with some schools to organize that. But again, it was not through a BCPS field trip approval process.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
No problem.
And would that still be appropriate and allowed given the policy, or would that be something that would also be eliminated?
So the vendor that I am aware of actually is not an approved vendor because of the structure in which they organize their trips and how they're funded. So that actually has nothing to do with the field trip policy. That vendor isn't engaging in that is not approved for other reasons, not the field trip policy.
Sure, totally understand. So if there was an appropriate vendor, if the policy changes to eliminate the foreign travel component, would an approved, appropriate ethical vendor be able to like use a school, possibly again, maybe have one of the teachers be a chaperone to organize a cultural trip for students? Do you know?
Ms. Ms. Delusky, I would hesitate to have staff answer.
Okay.
It's way too speculative. And it's also impossible to know without specifics whether or not there would be conflicts of interest under the ethics code, which have existed in the past.
I think what we're trying to get to here, or at least I believe, is, is this going to preclude something that happened in the past, like Ms. Zaleski described? And Dr. Donato said that it was because that vendor is no longer an approved vendor. But if that weren't the circumstance, and I guess you still can't answer the question, but I think that's what we're getting to. Is this going to preclude trips that have happened in the past from now continuing? Ms. Zaleski, is that,
Yeah, no,
okay.
that's great. And thank you. And I guess, right, of course, families on their own can do these cultural experiences, but, it's really wonderful for students who might not have that opportunity through their involvement with their high school or what have you, to have the chance to, to experience a cultural experience overseas. It's just a really wonderful opportunity. So I just don't want, I don't want to take that opportunity away if possible, especially for students who might not otherwise get that. So yes, that is exactly what my concern was. Thank you.
So, I mean, the change in policy is the recommended change in policy references the school system's approval and I guess facilitation, for lack of a better words, of the activity. So this is not it specifically referencing a vendor or a private organization, and I'm not quite sure how that approval process would work, but this is really referencing to the school system's ownership over the field trip approval process and the school system's supervision, responsibility, and care of students during said event. So that's
Okay.
not necessarily a private organization's thing that might work with a group of students.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Frempong, I also see your hand up. You may proceed.
Thank you. I do echo a lot of the questions that Board Member Stelusky was referencing. There have been students as well as even foreign language teachers talking about, the opportunity to have these trips, and for the teachers who have been in their program, been in BCPS for a while, it was something that they really enjoyed being able to do, as far as being able to have the opportunity to take students on these trips. And so I understand that we can't predict the future, and maybe there's a vendor that comes up that could work. But if we move forward and we remove the language, and I understand there has been research to say other LEAs are not doing this anymore either, what are going to be the opportunities then for students who, or even for teachers who would want to try to put together a program or a trip for the students? Are there going to be any opportunities for that?
So if the policy is revised to exclude foreign travel study programs, that would preclude the ability for the school staff through the field trip process to plan and organize that. Yes.
Okay, so it sounds like, okay, with the removal of that language, the opportunities, any options is completely removed at this point.
For the school to facilitate the sponsorship and organization of it, yes.
Okay, and then, so one of the things that we have now started to talk about in our policies that has been incorporated is this lens for equity. So yes, you could have, if there is a parent and or teacher who has resources, I guess, outside of the system, maybe they could still create it, but then that's not necessarily something for most families or parents that they would just be able to come up with resources on their own to be able to create a trip like that and have that experience.
Yeah. Hi, this is Dr. Jones. Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. In our review of the policy, and we definitely appreciate all of the considerations and the intentions around making sure that our students have robust learning experiences. In our review of the policy and in our research of other LEAs, one of the things that came out as it related to foreign travel in this moment that we're currently in is risk and liability and other things that come along with it. And so it's not something that I think everyone may be concerned about it never being revisited through the policy, but the policy is what we really need to create guardrails and guidance and procedures by which the system is going to operate. So as Ms. Howie said, it's very hard for us to be speculative about what individual teachers are doing or other entities, but all we can really speak to is Baltimore County Public Schools, neighboring school systems, and one of the things that continued to come up in our research around, foreign, the foreign aspect of field trips in this policy was risk. And so I just wanted to kind of give the why around it, again, in this moment, why we are choosing to make that a part of our policy moving forward in alignment with neighboring school systems.
Ms. Harvey, I see your hand raised next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to ask the why of it, so thank you for explaining that, Dr. Jones. I also wonder if there is room for compromise language in the policy to maybe say any foreign field trips have to go through, a certain review process, that may or may not, include like the State Department's, travel advisory list or something like that. And I appreciate wanting to provide, safe field trips for our students, but I wonder if this is an all or nothing proposition, and is there a way for us to leave open the possibility that foreign travel could still be an option in certain instances with a different level of scrutiny or assessment?
I certainly would want to have someone from risk management weigh in on that part of the question, Ms. Harvey, because I do think that goes back to, I don't think the curriculum office, who could say whether or not there was a curriculum connection to it, I would not ask my staff to discern based on again, looking at travel advisories to make a determination if something was safe or not. So I think that would certainly be a discussion to include risk management in that as far as a more robust, I guess, process. And then I guess the question of delineating where the policy and then the rule that, the implementation of this as far as like that, what that process would include, how those, intersect with one another, I think would be a follow-up item that we would need to take back to look at.
Right. I agree. I'm not interested in like the implementation piece. I'm more interested in leaving open the possibility in the policy that this type of travel could be an option. I know like academically, intellectually, we all understand that this policy could be revisited at any time, but it seems to be, more important to the members on this committee that there be some leeway or consideration for how we might leave it in there and keep our students safe.
So I mean,
Sorry.
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna move on, but if you want to respond, you
No,
may.
no, go ahead.
Okay, Ms. Hen, I see your hand up as well. You may
Thank
proceed.
you. Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I agree with Board Member Harvey. With everything she just said, I think the current policy provides for some latitude for this more stringent security measures under 2D and I believe 2G for the superintendent to develop guidelines. I think those guidelines can include security guidelines, can include risk controls. You know, there's a lot of room here to develop rules for implementing this. That's not our purview, that's the superintendent. So, like Board Member Harvey, I'm going to stay out of that lane. And I agree. We need to leave this opportunity intact. We are a board that creates opportunities for our students. We do not take them away. And if we eliminate foreign travel as an opportunity, that closes a door, which I'm hearing universally from my committee colleagues, we do not want to do. I'm hearing that loud and clear. So I believe we do want to leave it open. I think we have an opportunity to leave it open and allow the team here to find a way to make it happen. Because there are options, and whether they're BCPS sponsored or not, our schools can be resourceful. We have talented folks in our risk management office. We heard from this evening that I think we're asking to make it work, or to at least leave the option intact. It sounds like this committee is saying that, and I support that wholeheartedly. If you look at the first sentence of the policy, and again, not to steal Ms. Harvey's thunder, but she spoke to the academic values of it, but our policy says that in no uncertain term, we see the value in that, and we need to preserve that. And if we eliminate that altogether, and close that door, that does a huge disservice to our students. And the fact that other LEAs are just closing that door really doesn't matter to me much, because these are our students and we need to do what's best for them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Hen. Ms. Lusky, do you have another question or comment?
Thank you. Most of my comments were made. So thank you to Dr. Jones for explaining the rationale. And I want to thank Ms. Harvey for her suggestion about compromise. And the only thing that I'll say, that just to add on, is, you know, in looking at this policy with an equity lens, just agreeing with Ms. Harvey, Ms. Hen, I do think it is incumbent upon us to do our part to leave the opportunity open to students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lusky. So I want to clarify with committee members that I'm hearing that am I correct that we want to send this back for staff to add some compromising language regarding the foreign travel studies program? Is that the way you want to proceed at this point? If you disagree, let me know. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands. I'm going to say that policy 6800 will be returned to staff for some compromising language as far as the foreign travel study programs, instead of removing that language. Is that clear, Ms. Howie, to proceed and return to staff?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay.
So
All right,
may
thank you.
Doctors
Yes.
DiDonato and Jones be excused?
Yes, they may be excused. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you both.
colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Next on our agenda is item B4, policy 7240, designing school site selection and acquisition. Policy 7240 is also on the 2024-2025 review schedule. Dr. Grimm, if you and appropriate staff could please proceed.
Yes, good evening. Ms. Lazari, Director of Facilities Construction and Improvement, will be presenting on this policy and our last one, 7310.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Grimm. Um, This policy 7240 is for the school site selection and acquisition. It establishes procedures and guidelines for obtaining necessary approvals to be able to select and acquire new sites for schools. Staff in the Department of Facilities Management and Strategic Planning are not proposing any substantive changes and recommended that policy 7240 be readopted.
Thank you. Do I have any questions or comments from committee members? Okay, doesn't look like I'm seeing none. There are no corrections and no objection. Policy 7240 is moved forward to first reader as presented. Thank you. And next on our agenda is item B5, policy 7310, financing, design, and construction costs. And policy 7310 is also on the 24-25 review schedule. Dr. Grimm, if you and appropriate staff could please proceed.
Yes, Ms. Lazari will also be presenting on 7310.
Thank you.
Policy 7310 establishes procedures for determining school design and construction costs. Staff in the Department of Facilities Management and Strategic Planning are proposing no substantive changes and recommends that policy 7310 be readopted.
Thank you. Any question or comments from committee members? Okay, if there are no corrections and no objection, policy 7310 is also moved forward for first reader as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, committee members. May Ms. Lazari and Dr. Grimm be excused.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda is item D, Committee General Good and Welfare. The floor is now open to members of the committee to discuss issues of concern. I must emphasize that this is not the time to conduct business, as there has not been notice provided as required by the Open Meetings Act. Do any committee members have anything? Okay, seeing none. Item D, announcements and adjournment. The next meeting of the Policy Review Committee is scheduled for Monday, February 3rd, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. Because there is no further business, the meeting is now adjourned.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
evening,
committee
everyone.
members.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
your
Have a good
evening.
evening.
Good night, everyone.
Have a good evening.